The shooting happened at the Dakota apartment building minutes after John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono left a recording session. When they got out of their limousine, a waiting gunman said, "Mr. Lennon," crouched in military stance and squeezed off at least 4 shots from a .38 caliber pistol.
Within 2 minutes of the time I got there, they brought out Lennon. He was limp. He had blood coming outside of his mouth. He had his glasses on, and there were maybe 5 or 6 police officers holding him, carrying him, putting him in the back seat of a car. Very quickly, Yoko was with him.
Lennon was rushed to the nearest hospital just a few blocks away, but was dead on arrival. His body was taken to the morgue.
We have arrested Mark David Chapman of 55 South Kukui, K-U-K-U-I Street, Hawaii, for the homicide of John Lennon.
Chapman checked into this YMCA last Saturday, moved into a Midtown hotel the next day, was seen outside the Dakota over the weekend and yesterday. According to police, he managed to get Lennon to autograph a record album. During arraignment, Chapman was charged today with second-degree murder. He showed no reaction or emotion. The assistant district attorney said Chapman committed a deliberate, premeditated execution of John Lennon in a cool, calm, calculated manner. Chapman's court-appointed attorney called the shooting an apparently motiveless crime and told the court Chapman had tried twice in the past to commit suicide. Next court appearance is set for January 6th. Chapman will be kept under suicide watch while undergoing psychiatric evaluation at Bellevue Hospital.
As the news spread, fans start to gather here quite spontaneously, and then the doctor confirms, yes, John Lennon, brought here at 11 o'clock, he was dead on arrival. Doctors say they tried to revive him to make his heart beat again, but it was too late. He was gone.
There was a significant injury of the major vessels inside the chest, which caused a massive amount of blood loss, which probably resulted in his death.
Did he lose consciousness right away, do you think, from the...
I'm certain that he was dead at the moment that the first shots hit his body.
Lennon's wife, Yoko, waited at the hospital, pleading with doctors and police to tell her that it wasn't true, that he would be all right.
When word of what had happened got out, many people felt compelled to go to the Lennon's building, to stand outside and lend their presence to the night, and in their own rough way, to sing. Today, there were still crowds out there. Ringo Starr, who had been on vacation in the Bahamas, flew to New York and visited briefly with Yoko. He made no public statement. It wasn't a day for dealing with the public. Near Oxford, England, George Harrison stayed inside his mansion. A spokesman came out to say, he's just stunned like everyone else. He can't believe it's happened. Paul McCartney, Lennon's songwriting partner, issued a statement in London. John was a great man, he said. He will be missed by the whole world.
But today, 20 years later, it was Beatles music these mourners played, and as they continued to gather, they spoke of Lennon mostly in terms of the group he had wanted to forget.
We grew up with the Beatles, you know. We followed them all around, went to every concert. And we just loved him.
His music said something. It had meaning. He spoke of love and joy and good times and just, you know, just love in the world.
Well, I suppose the things I said are accurate, but out of context, you know.
Would you put them in context?
Well, I can't. It was a long time ago, but I just didn't mean what everybody thinks I meant, you know. I'm not anti-Christ or anti-religion. Or anti-God, you know.
Well, Mr. Lennon, they are suggesting that since you did say it so long ago and since so much has been made of it now that it's all a stunt to raise flagging popularity. Is this?
Are you sorry you said it?
I am, yes, you know, even though it's not, I never meant what people think I meant by it. still sorry I opened my mouth.
Lennon's private life was not always so happy. His first marriage to Cynthia ended in 1968. And soon afterwards he met Yoko Ono, who he subsequently married and who became a major influence on his music. They also staged a number of publicity stunts in the cause of peace. For a whole week they occupied the presidential suite of the Amsterdam Hilton as a protest against war and violence in the world. And they established themselves as one of the most famous couples of their age.
On my birthday, which is October the 9th. I'm still
You see
waiting.
how busy I was.
Great.
I am a very busy housewife, to put it mildly.
Metal salt and pepper shakers, $6.
Oh, no, they have to say that it was all a hoax.
What was it?
Lennon lying.
John Lennon doesn't affront the Queen by sending back his MBE. He doesn't make a ha'porth of difference to attitudes on Biafra and Vietnam or to the place of his drug-orientated record in the charts. He makes an ass of himself. He does affront hundreds of ordinary people who are proud to hold this rather ordinary decoration.
That wouldn't be bad, you know. I mean, I've worked with Ringo and George. I haven't worked with Paul because we had a more difficult time, but now we're pretty close, you know. So and the other question is, would it be worth it, you know? But that is answered by if we wanted to do it. If we wanted to do it, then it'd be worth it. If we got in a studio together and thought we turn each other on again, then it would be worth it, you know. And sod the critics, you know. I mean, you know, they've got nothing to do with it, you know. The music is the music. If we make a piece that we think was worthwhile, it goes out. But it's such a, you know, it's pie in the sky, you know. I don't care either way, you know. If somebody wants to pull it together, I'll go along, you know. I'm not in the mood to pull it together, that's for sure. I've got too much, I think we all have got too much to do ourselves. But if they were all in town, I wouldn't be, I'd say, come on down, you know, put them on my record, right? Then it'd be a Beatle record. But if they were around, you know, I jammed with Paul. I did actually play with Paul, yeah. We did a lot of stuff in L.A. But there was 50 other people playing too, and they're all just watching me and Paul, you know.
Yeah. You must be pleased with what Paul's doing now, John.
I'm pleased that everybody's doing well, you know. I'm more pleased that Ringo's doing well, you know, that he's got himself a good niche. Because I knew Paul would be all right. What the hell, I'm worried about him, you know, I know.
But only yesterday, millions of listeners to BBC Radio 1 were able to hear part of the last interview John Lennon would ever give. Disc jockey Andy Peebles, who was in New York to present yesterday's special broadcast and who interviewed John Lennon, came into our studio this afternoon. And here is part of that interview.
When we first moved here, we actually lived in the village, in Greenwich Village, which is the sort of artsy-fartsy section of town, for those who don't know, where all the students and the would-bes live, you know, and a few old poets and that. You know, people that have lived there for years, you know, still live there. But we got into this before we didn't finish it. She told me, yes, you can walk on the street, you know. She says, you will be able to walk here, but I would be walking around tense like that, waiting for somebody to say something or jump on me and like that. And it took me 2 years to unwind, I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. You want to know how great that is? Or go to the movies. I mean, people will come up and ask for autograph or say hi, but they won't bug you, you know.
Well, with a bitter irony, just 48 hours after recording that interview with Andy Peebles of Radio 1, John Lennon was shot dead in the street. Andy, he sounded from your interview on Saturday as if he was in great spirits, was he?
Yes, I think he was. I mean, as somebody who'd never met the man before and had always had him very much at the top, if not at the top, of the list of people that I would like to interview, I found John Lennon, the man who'd been away from all of us for 5 or 6 years, in a fantastic spirit and a great frame of mind, and willing to talk about every part of his career, going right back to the early days of the Quarrymen and the original name of the Beatles, through the Beatles era, through his era with Yoko Ono, through the work he'd done with her.
So there were no holds barred in the interview?
No, none at all, none at all. I mean, the conversation went all over the place during the course of our 3 and a bit hours interview and our dinner. We went out for dinner afterwards.
But what sort of things did he talk to you about personally when the tape recorder wasn't switched on? I mean, was he interested, for instance, about life in Britain today?
Oh, yes. I mean, at one stage in the interview, and also off mic, he was talking about Liverpool with great affection. In fact, Yoko was teasing him to a great extent about his love for Liverpool and telling me that when he read articles in the British newspapers, apparently he took The Guardian on a daily basis, he would get very, very emotional about the old home country.
What did he look like physically? Does he look like that these days?
No, he didn't look like that. Very definitely not like that. He's a lot thinner. And he was wearing a pair of fairly thick glasses with pinkish rims. He had a tight-fitting sweater on and a pair of jeans and a silver jacket with fur trim, and he looked every bit the pop star, I must say.
Now, why this new album at this stage? Well, is it had it been his intention to make a comeback?
Yes, I think it had, but he wanted to do it when he wanted to do it and not when other people dictated it to him. I mean, one must appreciate here that the Beatles went through endless management hassles and that the pressure showed, particularly with John Lennon, who fought against it. He was the politics, I think, behind the Beatles. He was the sense of humour. And I think probably, and this is only a personal assessment, John Lennon would have found the politics and the management situation more offensive than anybody else. And I think that was probably the initial reason for him wanting to quit. So when he came back, the timing had to be absolutely right, and the environment had to be right as well.
But was he also on the point of ending that part of his life that was the recluse, that shut himself away from the rest of humanity? Did he want to start life really afresh?
Well, of course, John would say, God bless him, if he was still here, but he never changed his life that radically. He reversed roles with his wife. She became the business manager. He became, and he said this to me in the interview, the husband, or rather the housewife, both at the same time. And it brought him incredibly close to his young son, Sean, which makes the events of the last 24 hours even more tragic, because he talked with such love and affection about the bond and the union between himself and his son.
You got off the aeroplane this morning, having just returned from the interview. How did you feel when they told you the news?
The realization that John Lennon, who I'd interviewed on Saturday night in New York, had died while I was flying over the Atlantic was a shattering experience.
Andy Peebles, thank you very much. Let's just end with another clip from your interview.
One final question to you. What about your private life and your own sense of security these days? David Bowie, I think, has recently said, but the great thing about New York is that he can walk down the street and people, instead of rushing up and ripping his clothes off, will come out, or rather just walk past him and say, "Hi, David, how are you?" And he can say, "I'm very well." Is it the same for John and Yoko?
Yeah, that's what made me finally stay here. It wasn't a conscious decision. I just found that I was going to movies, going to restaurants, and the 5 years, you think, you know, it was just baking bread and the baby. No, because I went to Hong Kong and walked around, and people could not appreciate what it was. When I left England, I still couldn't go on the street. It was still Carnaby Street and all that stuff was going on. We couldn't walk around the block, couldn't go to a restaurant, unless you wanted to go with the business of the star going to the restaurant garbage. I've just been walking the streets for the last 7 years.
But perhaps the people who will miss John Lennon most are his fellow professionals and friends and rivals who shared with him the golden age of British pop. And the artists who probably owe most are the singer-songwriters. Before the Beatles, they were an almost unknown breed, but they took the lead of John Lennon and Paul McCartney and became the stars of the British musical world. Among them, Alan Price. Alan, how much do you and your contemporaries in music feel that you owe to John Lennon?
So I should think about 100%, because mainly before the advent of the Beatles, especially in this country, the hands of songwriting was in the hands of the music companies and Tin Pan Alley and what have you. But because they made it legitimate by writing their own songs, performing and being successful, they opened the way for everybody else.
How do you assess him as a musician and a songwriter?
Oh, I thought he was wonderful, and he was a great rock and roll performer. I think Paul McCartney was very melodic and clever, but I think that basically the attraction of John Lennon was he never lost the roots and the music that he'd learned during the 50s, I think.
He was a very good lead guitarist too, wasn't he?
He was a good player, yeah.
Which of the Beatles songs that he wrote do you regard as the best?
The Beatles songs or his own songs?
No, the Beatles songs.
I really don't know. I think I once went down to his house when he was making the film Help, and he played me a song. He just heard about Bob Dylan, being influenced by him. He said he was even being made to sing like him because of the influence, and he'd written then, he played me a demonstration record of Norwegian Wood, so I remember that song.
Do you think he did a lot to bridge the gap between so-called popular and classical music? I mean, I know a lot of symphony orchestras actually enjoyed playing Beatles music, didn't they?
No, I think they only play them so they can make some money on the records.
He was a very intelligent man and a very sharp observer of the human scene, wasn't he?
Well, when I first, we all used to drink in a nightclub called the Ad-Lib in the middle 60s. And I'd never met the Beatles, and the manager said, do you want to meet the Beatles? So I went over, and he said, John, I'd like to introduce you to Alan Price. And he turned to Paul McCartney and he said, Paul is one of the others.